The iron wheels of the Union Pacific screeched against the rails, a high-pitched shriek that sounded less like mechanical braking and more like a dying animal. The sound tore through the dry, superheated air of the Arizona Territory, finally shuddering to a halt at the siding of Ironwood Junction. Amelia Hart, known to everyone back in Missouri as Millie, smoothed the front of her serge traveling dress. It was navy blue, practical for a schoolteacher in St. Louis, but entirely wrong for this landscape. The fabric was too heavy, the color too dark. Even before she stepped off the train, she could feel the heat radiating through the glass window, threatening to suffocate her. She picked up her valise. It was made of worn leather, scuffed at the corners, containing everything she owned in this world. In her pocket, her fingers brushed against two objects. One was a silver ring, simple and unadorned, which she had never worn. The other was a thick envelope, sealed with red wax that had softened slightly in the oppressive heat. Millie took a breath, composed her face into a mask of polite determination, and stepped out onto the platform. The sun was a physical weight. It pressed down on her bonnet, prickling her scalp. The air smelled of coal smoke, sagebrush, and the underlying copper tang of dried blood. Ironwood Junction was not much of a town. It was a scar on the face of the desert, a collection of timber and adobe buildings huddled together as if afraid of the vast, empty horizon that stretched out on all sides. She set her valise down and waited. The conductor threw a canvas sack of mail onto the wooden planks with a heavy thud, then tipped his cap to her without meeting her eyes. He climbed back aboard. The whistle blew, a lonely, mournful sound, and the train began to chug away, abandoning her to the dust. Millie stood alone. She scanned the few faces loitering in the shade of the depot overhang. There were men with hats pulled low, chewing on tobacco, their eyes hidden in shadow. There was a woman dragging a reluctant child by the arm, but there was no one who looked like the description she had memorized. Tall, sandy hair, a limp in the left leg from the war. Ezekiel Finch was not there. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The train was now just a smudge of smoke on the eastern horizon. The silence of the desert crept back in, broken only by the dry rasp of insects. Millie felt the gaze of the men on the platform. It was a heavy, physical sensation. In Missouri, a woman standing alone was a curiosity. Here, she realized with a cold shiver, a woman standing alone was a commodity, or a target. She tightened her grip on the handle of her valise. She would not cry. She would not look lost. She checked the envelope in her pocket again. Ezekiel had sent it with the money for her ticket. His letter had been strange, lacking the awkward romance usual for a correspondence courtship. Come to Arizona, he had written, I need a wife. Yes, but I need someone I can trust more. Keep this envelope on your person. Do not open it unless I do not meet you at the train. She had considered it melodramatic at the time. Now, the wax seal felt like it was burning a hole through her skirt. You waiting for a ghost, miss? The voice was gravelly and wet. Millie turned. A man stood blocking the sunlight, casting a long, distorted shadow over her. He wore a tin star pinned to a vest that was stained with sweat and grease. His face was sun-damaged, the skin peeling on his nose. His eyes were small and dark, like beads of oil. I am waiting for my fiancé, Millie said, her voice steady, summoning her best classroom authority. Mr. Ezekiel Finch. Perhaps you know him. The man's mouth twitched. It might have been a smile, but it lacked any mirth. He hooked his thumbs into his gun belt. Finch, yeah, I know him. Everyone knows Zeke. He was supposed to meet me. Plans change in the territory. Darling, things happen. The man stepped closer. He smelled of stale whiskey and unwashed horse. I am Deputy Rourke, and you look like you are a long way from home. I have my ticket, and I have a place to stay. She lied. If Mr. Finch is delayed, I will wait at the hotel. Rourke laughed, a dry, hacking sound. The hotel, right. You got papers, misidentification. I'm an American citizen, Millie said, lifting her chin. I do not need papers to travel from one state to another. We have had a lot of trouble lately. Whores coming up from the border, spies, agitators. Rourke looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her chest, then her hips. It was a violation without touch. Just checking you ain't one of them. I was a school teacher in St. Louis for 4 years, Millie said, her temper flaring despite her fear. I am here to be married. Now, if you will excuse me, Deputy, I believe the hotel is that way. She gestured toward a 2-story building with a faded sign that read, The Golden Spur. Rourke did not move immediately. He let the silence stretch, asserting his dominance, making sure she knew that he was letting her pass only because he chose to. You are lost, schoolteacher, he said softly. You just do not know it yet. He stepped aside. Millie picked up her suitcase, her knuckles white, and walked past him. She could feel his eyes boring into her back with every step she took toward the hotel. She did not look back. The lobby of the Golden Spur was actually just the front corner of a saloon. A partition of frosted glass separated the check-in desk from the noise of the bar. But it did nothing to stop the smell. The air was thick with tobacco smoke, spilled beer, and the scent of men who had been riding for weeks. The clerk was a thin man with spectacles that were cracked down the center of the left lens. He looked up as Millie entered, his eyes widening. A woman like her, clean, starched, respectable, was evidently a rare sight. I need a room, Millie said, and I need to leave a message for Mr. Ezekiel Finch when he arrives. The noise from the saloon side of the partition seemed to drop. The piano player did not stop, but the murmur of conversation cut out instantly. The clerk went pale. He glanced toward the swinging doors of the saloon, then back at Millie. Finch, the clerk whispered. Yes, Ezekiel Finch. Is he staying here? The clerk swallowed hard. He looked terrified. He leaned over the counter, his voice dropping to a hiss. Miss, you best not say that name so loud. Why ever not? Millie demanded, though a knot of dread was tightening in her stomach. He is my fiancé. He was. A voice boomed from the doorway. Millie turned. A large man in a tailored suit stood there. He looked prosperous, clean-shaven, but his eyes were hard. Behind him stood Deputy Rourke, smirking. I am afraid you have had a wasted trip. Miss, the man in the suit said, Ezekiel Finch is dead. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Millie gripped the edge of the counter to keep her knees from buckling. Dead? That is impossible. I have a letter from him dated only 2 weeks ago. Buried him 3 days ago, Rourke said, stepping forward, seemingly enjoying the moment. Shot resisting arrest. Arrest, Millie whispered. Ezekiel was a land surveyor, a quiet man. He was a thief, the man in the suit said. Involved in a stagecoach robbery out near the Canyon de la Luna. My name is Silas Crow. Miss, I own the cattle run north of here. It was my payroll he stole. We tried to bring him in peacefully, but he drew on the deputy here. Crow gestured to Rourke. Rourke tapped the handle of his pistol. Self-defense, ma'am. Clean shoot. Millie looked from Rourke to Crow. She saw the lie in their eyes. It was not a hidden lie. It was a blatant one, a lie that dared her to challenge it. Ezekiel Finch, the man who had written to her about the beauty of the cactus flowers and his dream of building a schoolhouse, was not a stagecoach robber. I see, Millie said. Her voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from someone else. She did not scream. She did not faint. The daughter of a minister knew how to stand tall at a funeral. Then I suppose I shall need that room for a few nights, until I can arrange a return passage. Crow narrowed his eyes. He seemed disappointed she had not collapsed. Did he send you anything before he passed? Maybe something he stole? The envelope in her pocket seemed to pulse against her hip. Open only if I do not come. I have my clothes, Millie said coldly. And a broken engagement, if that is what you mean by things he stole. Crow studied her for a long moment. Check her into room 4, he told the clerk. On the house for tonight. Least we can do for a grieving widow. Nearly. I can pay for my own room, Millie said, slapping a $5 gold piece onto the counter. It was half of her remaining money. "Suit yourself," Crow said. He tipped his hat. "Welcome to Arizona, Miss Hart." Crow and Rourke retreated into the saloon. The noise of the bar slowly resumed. But it felt forced now. Millie took the key from the trembling clerk and walked up the stairs. She felt like she was walking into the mouth of a wolf. Room 4 was small, hot, and smelled of dust. Millie locked the door. Then, seeing the flimsy nature of the latch, she dragged the heavy oak dresser across the floor and wedged it against the frame. Only then did she sit on the edge of the lumpy mattress. She took the envelope out of her pocket. It was thick, heavy. The seal was unbroken. Ezekiel was dead. He had been murdered. She was certain of it. And whatever was in this envelope was the reason why. Curiosity warred with caution. If she opened it, she knew. If she knew, she was involved. If she was involved, she might end up like Ezekiel. "Open only if I do not come." "He did not come," she whispered to the empty room. She reached for the wax seal. Suddenly, the glass of the window shattered. Millie screamed, throwing herself off the bed just as a gloved hand reached through the broken pane and unlatched the window. It swung open. A figure dressed in dark clothing vaulted into the room. It was not a thief looking for jewelry. The figure did not look at her necklace or the valise. He lunged straight for the bed where the envelope had fallen. "No!" Millie gasped. Adrenaline, sharp and electric, flooded her veins. She grabbed the water pitcher from the washstand and swung it with all her might. The ceramic pitcher smashed against the intruder's shoulder. He grunted, stumbling back. It was enough time. Millie snatched the envelope from the quilt and bolted for the door. She shoveled the dresser aside, her nails digging into the wood, tearing splinters into her skin. The intruder recovered and lunged for her, grabbing the back of her skirt. The fabric tore with a loud rip. Millie yanked the door open and threw herself into the hallway. She did not run for the stairs. The sounds of the saloon below were too loud. And Rourke was down there. Rourke was part of this. She ran to the end of the hall, to the back exit that the clerk had used to bring up luggage. She burst through the door and out onto the external staircase. The night air was cold, a shocking contrast to the day. The moon was a sliver, offering barely any light. Millie scrambled down the wooden steps, her boots slipping on the slick wood. She hit the ground in the alleyway behind the hotel. It was pitch black, filled with rotting garbage and discarded crates. "Get her!" a voice hissed from the window above. Millie ran. She did not know where she was going. She just ran away from the light of the main street, diving deeper into the labyrinth of shadows behind the town. Her foot caught on a loose root or a discarded bottle. She went down hard. The impact knocked the wind out of her. She scraped her palms against the gravel, the sting sharp and immediate. Scrambling to her knees, she tried to scream for help, though she knew no help would come. Suddenly, a hand shot out of the darkness. It was not a fumble. It was precise, iron hard. A hand clamped over her mouth, stifling her cry before it could leave her throat. Another arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her off the ground as if she weighed nothing. She was dragged backward, pulled into the deep recess between two adobe walls, hidden behind a stack of rain barrels. Millie struggled, kicking out, biting at the leather glove covering her mouth. "Be still," a voice murmured in her ear. It was a deep voice, calm and terrifyingly steady. "Unless you want Rourke to put a bullet in you too." The mention of Rourke made her freeze. The man holding her waited a beat, ensuring she was compliant, then slowly loosened his grip on her mouth. He did not let go of her waist. "Who are you?" Millie whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The man turned her around. In the faint starlight, he looked like something carved out of the desert itself. He was an Apache. She had seen drawings in the penny dreadfuls, caricatures of savages. But the man before her was nothing like those cartoons. He was wearing a mix of clothing, a faded cavalry shirt with the buttons missing, buckskin trousers, and high moccasins that made no sound. His hair was black, thick, and held back by a strip of red cloth. But it was his face that arrested her. It was a landscape of harsh angles, marked by a jagged white scar that ran from his cheekbone down to his jaw. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and utterly devoid of pity. He did not look at her like a woman to be courted. He did not look at her like a victim to be pitied. He looked at her like a scout assessing a liability. "I am the reason you are still breathing," he said. "They killed Ezekiel." Millie gasped, the reality finally crashing down on her. "They said he was a robber. He was a fool," the Apache said flatly. "But an honest one. You knew him." "I know what he carried." The man's eyes dropped to the envelope Millie was clutching to her chest. "And I know that Silas Crow will burn this entire town to get it back." Millie stepped back, pressing herself against the rough adobe wall. "Who are you?" "Nantan," he said, then, as if translating for a child. "Taza?" "You are an Indian scout. I am a man who is tired of burying people," Taza said. He looked toward the mouth of the alley. Two men with lanterns were running past, their boots crunching loudly on the gravel. They were shouting to each other, searching. Taza waited until the lights faded. Then he looked back at her. "Listen to me. Woman, listen closely. The man you came to marry is dead. The law in this town is bought and paid for by the man who killed him. That paper in your hand." He pointed a calloused finger at the envelope. "That is not a love letter. It is a death warrant." I have to go to the sheriff," Millie stammered, clinging to the rules of the world she had left in Missouri. "I have to report this?" Taza laughed, a short, sharp sound that held no humor. "Rourke is the law here. You go to him. You never leave that office. Crow wants that paper, and when he finds it on you, he will kill you. And do you know who he will blame?" He tapped his own chest. "He will say the Apache did it. He will say wild savages killed the poor white school teacher and took her money. He will use your body to start a war to clear my people off the water rights." Millie stared at him. The horror of his words sank in. It was monstrous. It was unbelievable. And yet, looking at the hard lines of his face, recalling the smirk on Rourke's lips and the cold eyes of Silas Crow, she knew it was the truth. She was not a person to them. She was a prop in a play she did not know she was auditioning for. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Taza stepped back, checking the sightlines of the alley. "I am not helping you. I am stopping Crow. If you die, the truth dies. And if the truth dies, my people lose the Canyon de la Luna." He held out his hand. It was a command, not an offer. "We have to move. The train station is watched. The roads are watched. If you stay here, you are dead by sunrise." Millie looked at his hand. It was scarred, dangerous, and brown. In St. Louis, she would have crossed the street to avoid him. Here, in the dark alley with the smell of death in the air. It was the only solid thing in the world. She looked at the envelope. She realized she had crossed a line. The life of Amelia Hart, schoolteacher and wife-to-be, had ended the moment she stepped off that train. "Where?" she asked. "Away," Taza said. "Into the dark. Careful, Darlin. This is not a storybook. You are the fox now, and the hounds are loose." Millie hesitated for 1 second, a heartbeat of mourning for the safe, boring life she was losing forever, and then she took his hand. "Lead the way," she said. Taza nodded, a flicker of respect passing through his dark eyes. He pulled her deeper into the shadows, moving silently toward the vast, indifferent desert that waited beyond the edge of the town. The hunt had begun. The graveyard of Ironwood Junction was a desolate patch of earth where the town buried its mistakes. There were no marble angels here, only wooden crosses bleached white by the sun and cairns of rocks piled high to keep the coyotes away. The air smelled of dry sage and the faint, sweet decay of disturbed earth. Taza moved through the rows of graves like a shadow detaching itself from the night. He did not make a sound. His moccasins found the solid ground between the loose shale, absorbing the impact of his steps. Amelia Hart stumbled behind him. Her boots, purchased in a sensible shop in St. Louis for walking on paved streets, were treacherous on the uneven ground. Her skirts caught on the thorns of low-growing mesquite bushes, every time fabric tore or a stone clattered under her heel. Taza stopped. He did not speak. He would simply turn his head, his profile sharp against the starlight, and wait until she regained her balance. The silence of his judgment was louder than any shout. "We are leaving the town behind," Millie whispered, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. The corset she wore felt like a vice made of whalebone and regret. "Where are we going?" "To the living," Taza said. His voice was low, vibrating in the quiet dark. "The dead do not need us. Rourke will check the road to the east first." He led her not toward the open road, but up a narrow, winding goat track that ascended the ridge of rock overlooking the settlement. It was a brutal climb. Millie had to hike her skirts up to her knees, dignity forgotten in the face of survival. Her hands were raw from gripping the rough sandstone. They reached a shallow depression near the crest of the ridge, sheltered by a cluster of boulders. Below them, Ironwood Junction was a grid of yellow lantern light and deep shadows. It looked small from up here, insignificant against the vast, crushing blackness of the desert floor. Taza crouched, his eyes scanning the perimeter of the town below. "Sit," he commanded, "and keep your head down. A rifle scope can catch moonlight off a button if the shooter is good." Millie collapsed onto a flat rock. Her legs were trembling uncontrollably. She pressed her hands against her thighs to stop them, but the shaking came from her bones. She was a schoolteacher. She taught arithmetic and geography. She did not run from gunmen in the middle of the night with a savage warrior. "The envelope," Taza said. He did not look at her. He was watching a group of riders gathering near the livery stable below. "Open it." Millie reached into her torn pocket. The wax seal was cracked now. The red emblem of Ezekiel's signet ring split down the middle. Her fingers felt numb. "He said to open it only if he did not meet me," she murmured. "He did not meet you," Taza said. "He is on the ground back there. Open it." Millie tore the paper. Inside were 3 folded sheets of ledger paper, torn hastily from a bound book, and a smaller, crinkled note written in pencil. She unfolded the note first. The handwriting was jagged, written in a hurry or perhaps in fear. "Millie, if you are reading this, my luck ran out. I am sorry. I wanted to give you a house, but I have found a war instead. Silas Crow is not just a rancher. He is the devil of the territory. He is diverting government beef and blankets meant for the reservation and selling them to the miners in Mexico. He is trading whiskey and surplus rifles to the renegades to stir up trouble, then demanding the army clear the land for safety. It is all in the numbers. Look at the supply logs. He is starving them out to provoke a fight. His goal is the Canyon de la Luna. He wants the water rights. If he gets them, the tribe dies or moves to the dry flats, which is the same as dying. Take this to Lieutenant Wyatt Carver at Fort Huachuca. Trust no one in Ironwood. Trust no one with a star on their chest. I loved you before I ever saw you. Forgive me, Zeke." Millie felt a hot tear track through the dust on her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. She unfolded the ledger pages. Even in the dim light, the columns of numbers were damning. She knew bookkeeping. Her father had insisted she learn to manage the parish accounts. "It is a ledger," Millie said, her voice steadying as her mind latched onto the logic of numbers. Discrepancies in weight and inventory. Barrels of flour marked as delivered that never arrived. Crates of rifles listed as lost in transit that matched shipments of gold from the border. Taza turned his head. For the first time, he looked at her with something other than tactical assessment. He looked at the papers in her hand. "Ezekiel was a good man," Taza said. "He saw hunger and did not look away. Most white men look away." "He says Crow wants the Canyon de la Luna," Millie said. "Is that where your people are?" "It is where the water is," Taza replied. He shifted, sitting cross-legged in the dust, his rifle resting easily across his knees. "In this land, water is blood. The canyon has the only spring that runs all year in the southern range. My people, the families, the old ones who can no longer run, they are camped there. It is our last stronghold. And Crow wants it for his cattle. Cattle need water, but Crow needs land deeds." Taza corrected. "He cannot claim the land while the Apache are there. If he can prove we are dangerous, If he can prove we are raiding and killing, the government will send soldiers to force us onto the reservation at San Carlos. Then the land is empty. Then the land is his. Millie looked down at the ledger. He is staging the robberies, she realized, the horror of it cold in her stomach. He is giving guns to renegades to attack his own neighbors, just to blame it on you. And tonight, Taza said, pointing toward the town, he will blame you. Millie followed his gaze. Below, the activity in the town had changed. It was no longer the lazy drift of a late night. Torches were being lit. Men were mounting horses. The sound of a bell began to toll, a frantic, rhythmic clang that signaled fire or danger. They are gathering a posse, Taza said. Crow will tell them you are a spy. He will say you lured Ezekiel to his death and stole the payroll money. He will put a price on your head that will make every drifter in the territory hunt you down. Character versus self rose up in Millie like a physical sickness. She looked at the dark desert stretching out to the north. It was terrifying. It was empty. And then she looked east, toward the invisible railroad tracks. I could go back, she whispered. The words tasted like ash. If I walk to the next station? If I just get on a train? You could, Taza said. He did not reach out to stop her. He did not threaten her. He simply laid the truth out like a knife on a table. You could throw those papers in the dirt and walk away. You might even make it to the border before Rourke catches you. You could go back to your schoolhouse and teach children that the world is fair. He paused, his dark eyes locking onto hers. But Crow will not stop. He will take the canyon. He will kill the men and starve the children. And Ezekiel died for nothing. Millie gripped the paper so hard it crinkled. She thought of Ezekiel, a man she had never touched, a man who had died trying to save strangers. She thought of her father's sermons about righteousness, which had always seemed so easy in the safety of a Sunday morning pew, and so impossible now. She was afraid. She was terrified of the man sitting next to her, terrified of the men hunting her, terrified of the silence of the desert. She did not want to be a hero. She wanted to be safe. Why me? She asked, her voice cracking. I am just a teacher, because you hold the truth, Taza said, and because you are already here. He stood up, slinging his rifle over his shoulder in one fluid motion. Decide, Amelia Hart. The moon is rising. If we stay here another hour, the decision will be made for us by a bullet. Millie looked at the ring in her pocket. She looked at the ledger. She thought of the families and old ones Taza had mentioned. Who is Lieutenant Carver? She asked. A soldier who still has honor. Taza said, he is at the outpost 2 days' ride from here. If we get the book to him, he can petition a federal judge. He can stop Crow. 2 days, Millie repeated. It sounded like a lifetime. 2 days of hard riding, little water, no sleep. Taza looked down at her. Can you ride? I have ridden a carriage, Millie said defensively. Taza made a sound that might have been a grunt of amusement or despair. Then you will learn. Come. He offered his hand again. This time. Millie took it without hesitation. As they moved away from the ridge, picking their way through the rocks toward where Taza had hidden 2 horses. Millie glanced back at the town one last time. The lights of the Golden Spur were bright and inviting. She could imagine the piano playing, the smell of sawdust and beer. It was civilization. It was the world she knew. But as she watched, a group of riders thundered out of the main street, their torches trailing sparks like angry comets. They were spreading out, heading for the roads, heading for the passes. Crow had unleashed the hounds. She saw a man nailing a sheet of paper to the post of the water tower. Even from this distance, she knew what it was. A wanted poster. Wanted the Apache murderer and his white accomplice. The wind shifted, carrying the sound of shouting up the canyon walls. It was a hungry sound. I'm not a guest anymore, Millie whispered to the wind. No, Taza said, tightening the cinch on a paint horse that merged with the shadows. You are prey, but prey can fight back if it has teeth. He handed her the reins of the smaller horse. Mount up, and stay close. The desert does not forgive those who stray. Millie placed her foot in the stirrup. It was awkward in her dress. and she had to haul herself up with a lack of grace that would have scandalized her mother. But she got into the saddle. She tucked the envelope deep into the bodice of her dress, against her skin, where the beat of her heart would guard it. Taza swung onto his horse with the grace of a man who had been born in the saddle. He checked the wind, checked the stars, and then turned his horse toward the deep, jagged darkness of the Badlands. "We rode for the canyon," he said. "Do not fall behind." Millie gripped the reins. The leather was cold. "I will keep up," she said. And as they descended into the black throat of the desert, leaving the lights of Ironwood Junction behind, Amelia Hart realized that the woman who had stepped off the train that afternoon was gone. She had been left on the platform. The woman riding into the dark was someone else entirely. Someone forged in the span of 3 hours by death and duty. She was no longer a mail-order bride. She was a witness, and she intended to survive. The night swallowed them whole. The only sound the rhythmic strike of hooves on stone and the distant, mournful cry of a coyote, signaling the start of the hunt. But even as fear clawed at her throat, a strange clarity settled over her. The choice was made. The safe path back east was a lie. The only way out was through the desert, through the danger, and through the fire that Silas Crow had lit. "Lead on, Taza," she whispered into the wind. The Apache did not look back, but he raised one hand in acknowledgement, a silent pact between two outcasts in a land that wanted them both dead. The sun was not merely a celestial body in the Arizona territory. It was a physical weight, a hammer that struck the earth with relentless, blinding force. For 2 days, it had been the third traveler in their party, silent and oppressive. Amelia Hart felt as though her skin was turning to parchment. The navy serge dress, so respectable in the cool parlors of St. Louis, had become a prison of sweat and dust. Every seam rubbed raw against her flesh. Her lips were cracked, tasting of salt and iron. They had been riding hard since leaving the outskirts of Ironwood Junction, sticking to the hard-packed caliche and rocky wash-bottoms where hooves left no imprint. Taza rode ahead, his posture straight, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. He seemed impervious to the heat, a creature forged from the very landscape that was trying to kill her. Millie's horse, a roan mare with a gentle disposition but a choppy gait, stumbled over a loose stone. Millie gasped, clutching the pommel to keep from sliding off. Taza halted instantly. He turned his paint horse, looking back at her. His face was unreadable beneath the brim of his battered hat. "We stop," he said. "I can keep going," Millie rasped. Her voice sounded like dry leaves scraping together. "The horse cannot," Taza corrected. "And you are swaying like a drunkard. If you fall, you break a bone. We cannot carry a cripple." He steered them toward a cluster of mesquite and ironwood trees huddled near the base of a red sandstone overhang. It offered a sliver of shade, a mercy in the white-hot afternoon. Millie slid from the saddle, her legs buckling as they hit the ground. She caught herself against the horse's flank. Taza was already on the ground, loosening the cinches of the saddles to let the animals breathe. "Water," Taza said, handing her a canteen. "3 swallows, no more. If you drink too fast, you will sick it up, and we cannot afford to waste the moisture." Millie took the warm metal container. The water was tepid and tasted of tin, but it was the most delicious thing she had ever consumed. She counted the swallows, 1, 2, 3, and forced herself to lower the canteen. "We rest until the sun drops," Taza said. "Then we ride through the night." He moved with an economy of motion that fascinated and irritated her. He checked the horse's hooves, adjusted the gear, and scanned their back trail, all without a wasted step. Millie, by contrast, felt useless. She wanted to help, to prove she was not just baggage, but she did not know where to begin. She decided to make a fire. The nights grew surprisingly cold, and she knew they would need coffee if they were to ride until dawn. She gathered a pile of dry brush and twigs, arranging them in a neat pyramid as she had read in a survival guide for missionaries. She pulled a small book of poetry from her valise, a sentimental comfort she had refused to abandon, and tore out a page of Keats to use as kindling. She struck a lucifer match against a rock. The flame flared, caught the paper, and then immediately smothered itself under the weight of the heavy wood she had stacked too tightly. She tried again, and again. Smoke billowed up, stinging her eyes, but no true fire caught. A shadow fell over her. Taza stood there, watching her struggles. He did not look impressed. "You are trying to send a signal to Rourke?" he asked. "That smoke can be seen for 10 miles. Millie flushed, the heat in her cheeks rivaling the sunburn. "I am trying to make coffee, with green wood and paper." Taza shook his head. He crouched beside her, dismantling her neat pyramid with a sweep of his hand. "You build a fire like a white man builds a house. Too much wall, not enough air." He took a piece of flint and a steel striker from his pouch. He gathered a small handful of dried grass, twisted it into a bird's nest, and struck the steel. A single spark landed in the grass. He blew on it gently. A long, steady breath. The grass glowed orange, then burst into a small, clean flame. He added tiny twigs, then slightly larger ones, feeding the fire as if it were a living thing. "Paper burns too fast," he said, glancing at the torn page of Keats fluttering in the dirt. "And words do not keep you warm?" Millie snatched the page back, dusting it off. "Civility keeps us human, Mr. Taza, even in the wilderness." "Civility gets you dead out here," he said, feeding a piece of ironwood into the flames. The wood burned hot and smokeless. "You cover your tracks with a branch, but you leave a scent of lavender soap that a blind man could follow. You speak when you should listen. You try to be polite to the desert." He looked at her, his dark eyes sharp. "The desert does not care if you say please. It only cares if you are strong." "I'm strong," Millie insisted, though her voice wavered. "We will see," Taza said. He handed her a strip of dried meat. "Eat. Silence is also a lesson." They rode again as the sun began to bleed into the western horizon, turning the sky a bruised purple. The landscape changed, the flat scrub giving way to rising foothills. Late in the night, they came upon a low adobe structure sitting alone near a dry wash. A lantern hung by the door, a beacon in the vast emptiness. "Martha Pike's place," Taza said quietly. "She is a healer, and she hates Silas Crow more than I do." They approached cautiously. Taza signaled Millie to wait while he rode forward. A moment later, the door opened, and a woman stepped out with a double-barreled shotgun leveled at Taza's chest. She was a formidable figure, broad-shouldered, wearing a man's canvas coat over a calico skirt. Her hair was steel gray, pulled back in a severe bun. "You bring trouble to my door, Apache," the woman called out. Her voice was like grinding stones. "I bring a woman who needs a friend. Martha," Taza replied, keeping his hands visible. Martha lowered the gun slightly. She squinted into the dark. Spotting Millie, "Well, get down off those horses before you freeze to death." Inside, the station smelled of dried herbs, lye soap, and wood smoke. It was cluttered but clean. Martha Pike moved with surprising speed for a woman of her size. She set a kettle on the stove and turned to Millie, looking her up and down with critical eyes. "You look like a plucked chicken, girl," Martha said bluntly. "Sunburn on your nose, dust in your hair. You are the one from the train station, the one they say killed Zeke Finch." Millie stiffened. "I did not kill him. He was dead before I arrived." "I know that," Martha said, pouring strong, black coffee into tin cups. "Zeke was a good soul, too soft for this land, but good. And you are the school teacher, Amelia Hart." "Well, Amelia Hart, you are in a fine mess." Martha sat heavily on a wooden stool. "A rider came through 4 hours ago, said there is a reward of $500 on your head, and 1,000 of them." She nodded at Taza, who was standing by the window, peering out through a crack in the shutters. $500, Millie whispered. It was a fortune. Men would kill their own brothers for that much money. "Men do not kill you for the money. Mostly," Martha said, her voice dropping to a softer register. "They kill you because it is easy. But the rumors are what kill your life. They say you are a spy, a witch, a traitor who lay down with savages to cut white throats. Millie felt the blood drain from her face. That is a lie. Truth does not matter to a mob. Martha said. Crow is spinning a story. He needs a villain so he can be the hero. Martha stood up and went to a heavy wooden chest. She pulled out a sewing kit and a small, sleek pistol. Give me that book you are hiding, Martha ordered. Millie produced the envelope with the ledger pages. Martha took it, then gestured for Millie to unbutton the bodice of her dress. We are going to sew this into the lining of your corset, Martha explained, threading a needle with swift, practiced fingers. If they catch you, they will search your pockets and your bag. They rarely search a woman's undergarments unless they are looking for a different kind of prize. And if it comes to that, she picked up the pistol. It was a derringer, small enough to hide in a palm. You know how to use this? I have never held a gun, Millie admitted. Figures. Martha pressed the cold metal into Millie's hand. It has 2 shots. You do not aim with your eye. At this range, you point with your finger. But remember this, the gun is the last part of the fight. The first part is your head. You panic, you die, you hesitate, you die. Martha gripped Millie's chin, forcing her to look up. If a man comes at you to do you harm, you do not warn him. You do not ask him to stop. You put this against his chest and you pull the trigger. Can you do that? Millie looked at the weapon. It felt heavy, hateful. But she thought of the way Rourke had looked at her in the saloon. She thought of Ezekiel. Yes, Millie said. Good. While Martha sewed the documents into Millie's clothing, Taza went outside to check the horses. He returned a few minutes later, his face grim. There is a wagon behind the shed. Taza said to Martha, Whose is it? Belongs to a peddler who came through yesterday. He is sleeping in the barn. Why? There is a sound coming from it. Taza went back out, Millie and Martha following. He approached the canvas-covered wagon and pulled back the flap. He spoke a few sharp words in a language Millie did not understand. Apache. A rustling sound came from within. Then, slowly, a small face peered out from behind a crate of dry goods. It was a girl, no older than 9. Her hair was black and matted, her eyes wide with terror. She wore a torn calico dress that was too big for her. Jolie, Taza breathed. The harshness in his face vanished, replaced by a look of profound relief and pain. He reached out, and the girl scrambled into his arms, burying her face in his neck. You know her? Millie asked. She is of my clan, Taza said, his voice thick. She was taken 3 weeks ago. We thought she was dead. The peddler said he found her wandering near the salt flats, Martha said, her face darkening. Said he was taking her to the orphanage in Tucson. I should have known better. He was likely taking her to Crow. Taza set the girl down but kept a hand on her shoulder. Jolie looked at Millie with suspicion, shrinking back against Taza's leg. She is the leverage, Taza said, his eyes cold fury. Crow takes the children. He tells the fathers, sign the treaty, give up the water, and you get your daughter back. It is a soft hostage, no blood, just fear. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a piece of hardtack and a strip of dried venison, his rations for the next 2 days. He handed them to the girl. She ate ravenously, tearing at the meat. Millie watched as Taza took his own canteen and held it for the child, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek with a thumb that was calloused from killing. He was not the savage the newspapers in St. Louis wrote about. He was a man, a tired man, fighting a war that had no rules. We take her, Taza said. I cannot leave her. It will slow us down, Martha warned. I carry her, Taza said. She weighs nothing but bones. They left Martha's station an hour before dawn, resupplied with water and a bag of cornmeal Martha had pressed into Millie's hands. Ride safe, teacher, Martha had said. And keep your head. The journey became harder with the child. Jolie rode behind Taza, her arms wrapped tight around his waist. The extra weight slowed the paint horse, and the heat of the day returned with a vengeance. Around noon, they found the messenger. He was lying face down in the middle of the trail, his horse grazing nearby. An arrow protruded from his back. Millie gasped, turning her head away. Taza dismounted and examined the body. He did not touch the arrow. He merely looked at the fletching, then at the ground. "Rourke has been busy," Taza said. "An Apache arrow?" Millie asked, dread pooling in her stomach. "An arrow bought in a souvenir shop in Santa Fe." Taza spat. "The feathers are turkey, not hawk. And look at the tracks. Shod horses. 4 of them. Apaches do not shoe their horses." He stood up, looking at the dead man. "This was a messenger from the telegraph office. Rourke killed him to stop news from getting out, and left this sign to make the town angry. By tonight, every man with a rifle will be out looking for hostile Indians." "They are turning the world against you," Millie said. "They are turning it against us," Taza corrected. "You are with me. In their eyes, you fired that arrow." The reality of their situation pressed down on Millie. There was no going back. The lie had been told, and it was written in blood. As evening approached, the sky turned a sickly yellow. The wind picked up, whipping sand into stinging clouds. "Storm!" Taza shouted over the rising gale. "A dust devil! We need cover!" They pushed the horses toward a spine of jagged rocks rising from the desert floor. The wind screamed, erasing the world in a wall of brown grit. Millie could not see Taza, only the vague shape of his horse. She wrapped her shawl around her face, blinding herself, trusting the horse to follow the leader. They found a crevice in the rocks, a shallow cave just deep enough for them and the horses to huddle out of the direct wind. Taza pulled Millie and Jolie from their saddles and pushed them into the furthest corner. The storm raged for hours. Outside, the world was a howling void. Inside, the air was thick with dust. Millie slumped against the stone wall. Her head was throbbing, her body burning. The exhaustion of the ride, the lack of sleep, and the sheer terror had finally caught up with her. She shivered violently, her teeth chattering despite the heat. "You are burning," Taza said. His hand touched her forehead. It was cool and rough. "I am fine," Millie mumbled, her eyes closing. "Just tired." "You have the fever of the sun," Taza said. He unrolled his bedroll and draped the heavy wool blanket over her. He pulled Jolie close to his other side, shielding both the woman and the child with his own body. He built a small fire near the mouth of the crevice, shielding it with his body so the light would not carry. He sat there, cross-legged, his rifle across his lap, staring out into the swirling sand. Millie drifted in and out of consciousness, in her fevered dreams. She saw Ezekiel's face, then Rourke's, then the dead messenger, but every time she woke, gasping for air, she saw Taza. He was always there. He did not sleep. He did not move except to feed the fire or check on Jolie. At one point, deep in the night, Millie woke to find him looking at her. The firelight danced in his dark eyes, softening the hard angles of his face. He reached out and adjusted the blanket, tucking it tighter around her shoulders. His hand lingered for a second, not on her skin, but on the wool covering her. It was a gesture of protection, a silent promise. "Sleep, Amelia," he whispered. "I will watch the dark." Millie closed her eyes. For the first time since stepping off the train, she did not feel afraid. She was a fugitive. She was hunted. She was likely dying of fever in a hole in the rocks. But she was not alone, and as the storm howled outside, trying to tear the world apart, Millie Hart realized that the man guarding the fire was the most honorable thing she had found in the entire American West. The outpost was little more than a collection of timber shacks and a corral. Huddled against the base of a dark mesa like a child afraid of the dark, Lieutenant Wyatt Carver met them 3 miles out, in a dry wash where the shadows were deep enough to hide a regiment. Carver looked older than his 30 years. His uniform was dusty, and the yellow stripe on his trousers was faded to the color of dry wheat. He held his horse's reins with nervous hands, his eyes darting to the ridgeline every few seconds. "You should not have come," Carver said, his voice a harsh whisper. "Crow knows you are moving. He has men watching the passes. We have the proof." "Wyatt," Taza said, swinging down from his horse. He did not let go of his rifle. The ledger? It shows the beef shipments diverted to Mexico. It shows the whiskey trade. Carver wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his glove. It does not matter what you have if you are dead before you can show it to a judge. The Colonel! He received a telegram this morning from Washington, or so he says. It orders your immediate arrest for the murder of Ezekiel Finch. Millie stepped forward. The dust of the trail coated her face, but her eyes were bright with indignation. That is a lie. You know it is a lie, Lieutenant. I know it, Carver said, looking at her with genuine pity. But my knowledge does not change the orders. Crow has friends in the War Department. He has painted Taza as a renegade who kidnapped a white woman. If I take you in now, you will never make it to the stockade. You will be shot attempting to escape before sunrise. Then help us, Taza said. Carver reached into his saddlebag. He pulled out a folded map and a canteen. There is a federal circuit judge, Judge Holloway. He is traveling south from Tucson. He is due to camp at Painted Rock tomorrow night. Holloway's a hard man, but he hates corruption more than he hates Indians. If you can get that book to him, he has the authority to deputize men and override the local warrants. Painted Rock, Taza repeated. That is through the open country. It is the only chance, Carver said. But you have to go now. My patrol is 5 minutes behind me. I told them I saw dust to the west to draw them off, but they will circle back. Suddenly, the crack of a rifle shot shattered the stillness. Carver's horse reared, screaming. Dust kicked up inches from Millie's boot. Go! Carver shouted, slapping the rump of Taza's paint horse. Ride, I will hold them off. Taza did not hesitate. He grabbed Millie by the waist and threw her onto her mare, vaulting onto his own mount in a blur of motion. Jolie was already clinging to the back of his saddle. More shots rang out from the ridge flashes of orange fire against the indigo sky. They tore out of the wash, galloping blindly into the night. Millie bent low over her horse's neck, the wind tearing at her hair. She heard the whine of lead passing close to her ear, an angry hornet sound that made her blood turn to ice. Then she felt a sudden, searing heat on her left shoulder. It was not like being hit. It was like being touched by a branding iron. The shock of it nearly unseated her. She cried out, but the sound was lost in the thunder of hooves. Do not stop, Taza's voice roared from ahead. They rode until the horses were frothing, putting miles of broken rock and scrub between them and the ambush. They did not stop until they reached the high caves of the Sierra Ancha, where the terrain was too rough for shod cavalry horses to follow in the dark. Taza slid from his horse and immediately pulled Millie down. She stumbled, her left arm hanging uselessly at her side, blood soaking the dark fabric of her sleeve. Jolie, build a fire, small one, in the back of the cave, Taza commanded. He half-carried Millie into the shelter of the rock. The cave was small, smelling of bat guano and old campfires. He set her down on his bedroll. Let me see, he said. His voice was not panicked, but it had a tightness she had not heard before. It burns, Millie gasped. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a sick, throbbing pain. Taza took a knife from his belt. This will ruin the dress, he said, and with a swift, careful motion, he slit the heavy serge fabric from the collar down to the elbow. He peeled the cloth away. The bullet had furrowed the skin along the top of her shoulder. It was a deep graze, ugly and bleeding freely, but it had not shattered the bone. You are lucky, Taza said. 2 inches to the right, and it would have found the lung. He turned to the small fire Jolie had started. He poured water from his canteen into a tin cup and set it near the coals. Then he came back to Millie. I have to clean it. It will hurt. Millie nodded, biting her lip. She watched him work. He dipped a piece of clean linen torn from his own spare shirt into the warm water. When the cloth touched the raw wound, Millie hissed, arching her back. Tears sprung to her eyes, hot and unbidden. She grabbed his wrist, her fingers digging into his skin. Taza stopped. He did not pull away. He did not tell her to be quiet. He simply waited, his dark eyes locking onto hers. Breathe, he said softly. "Breathe with me, Amelia." He inhaled slowly, a deep, rhythmic breath. Millie tried to match him. In, out, in, out. He began to clean the wound again. His hands, so lethal with a rifle or a knife, were incredibly gentle. He moved with a reverence that made her breath hitch in her throat. He washed away the blood and the grit, his touch firm but agonizingly careful. Millie looked at his face in the flickering firelight. The harsh lines of his scar were softened. He was concentrating entirely on her pain, absorbing it, managing it. "I was so afraid," she whispered, the tears finally spilling over. "When the shooting started, I thought I would never see the morning." "Fear keeps you alive," Taza said, applying a poultice of damp herbs he had pulled from his pouch. The smell was sharp and earthy, like rain on sagebrush. "Only fools are not afraid of gunfire. I am not a soldier," she sobbed, her composure cracking under the strain of the pain and the intimacy of the moment. "I am just a teacher. I do not belong here." Taza finished binding the wound with a strip of cloth. He sat back on his heels, but he did not move away. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. "You are here," he said. "That is all that matters. You rode through the fire. You held on to the saddle. Many men would have fallen." "I wanted to fall," she confessed. "I wanted to stop. But you did not." He reached out and brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead. His fingers lingered for a second on her temple. It was an electric touch, grounding her. Millie really looked at him. She saw the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes, the weight of a dying world on his shoulders. She realized that he was just as afraid as she was. Not for himself, but for the child sleeping in the corner. And for her. Without thinking, moving on an instinct she did not know she possessed, Millie reached out with her good hand. She placed her palm flat against his chest, over his heart. She needed to know he was real. She needed to feel the engine of his life, the drumbeat that kept driving them forward, under her hand. His heart beat strong and steady. Thump, 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 thump. It was a powerful rhythm, a war drum and a lullaby all at once. Taza went still. He looked down at her hand, pale and small against his dark shirt. Then he looked up at her face. For the first time since she had met him in the alley, the hardness in his eyes completely vanished. A smile, slow and rare as rain in the desert, tugged at the corner of his mouth. He leaned in closer, until his forehead was almost touching hers. His voice dropped to a rumble that she felt in her own chest. "Careful, Darlin," he whispered. "That is where you live now?" Millie's breath caught. The words were not a flirtation. They were a statement of fact. She had moved into the space of his life, and he had made room for her in the center of it. "I'm not leaving," she whispered back. "Good," he said, "because the road gets harder from here." He pulled back slowly, the moment stretching like taffy, before turning to check on Jolie. But the air in the cave had changed. The cold was gone. They slept in shifts. Millie drifted into a fitful doze, the pain in her shoulder a dull throb, comforted by the rhythmic breathing of the man beside her. Morning brought a cruel awakening. Millie woke to the sound of Taza's boots crunching on gravel. He was running. She sat up, wincing as her shoulder protested. "Taza!" He burst back into the cave, his face a mask of terrifying rage. "She is gone." "Who?" "Jolie." They scrambled out of the cave. The sun was just crowning the eastern peaks, casting long, blood-red shadows across the canyon floor. Down in the wash, near where the horses were picketed, there was a sign, a crude arrow drawn in the dirt, pointing south, and impaled on a cactus thorn was a scrap of the calico dress Jolie had been wearing. "I told her not to leave the cave," Taza growled, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "She must have gone for water. The spring is down there." "Rourke," Millie whispered. "He did not kill her," Taza said, scanning the ground. "There is no blood. And the tracks, they led her away. They waited for her." He walked to a flat rock near the spring. There was a piece of paper held down by a stone. Taza snatched it up. He did not read it. He handed it to Millie. "Read it," he commanded. Millie smoothed the crumpled paper. The handwriting was crude, block letters penciled by a heavy hand. "The book for the girl, Box Canyon, noon. Come alone or she bleeds." Millie looked up at Taza. He was staring at the horizon. His jaw set so hard a muscle twitched in his cheek. This was the choice he had feared. "The ledger saves the tribe," Taza said, his voice devoid of emotion, terrible in its flatness. "It saves the land. It saves hundreds." "She is a child," Millie said. "She is 9 years old. She is one life," Taza said. "If I give Crow the book, he wins. He takes the water. The old people die. The families scatter and starve. Is one life worth 100? It was the arithmetic of war. Millie saw the agony in his eyes. He was trying to be the leader, the Nantan, the protector of the many. But she saw the man who had given the girl his own food, who had carried her while she slept. "It is not just arithmetic, Taza," Millie said fiercely. "If you let her die, you kill the reason you are fighting. You are fighting for a future for your people. She is that future. And if I give up the book, she has no future anyway," he snapped. "She grows up a beggar on the edge of a white town." Millie paced the small clearing. Her mind was racing, her teacher's brain categorizing and analyzing the problem. "We do not give them the book," she said. Taza looked at her. "You want to fight. They will have guns at her head before I can lift my rifle." "No," Millie said. "We give them what they think is the book." She ran back to her saddlebag and pulled out the ledger. She also pulled out her own journal, a bound notebook she used for lesson planning. It was roughly the same size. "I can copy the pages," she said, her voice gaining speed. "The handwriting in the ledger is simple. Lists of numbers, dates. I can copy the last 3 months, the damning months, onto the paper from my journal. We bind it into the ledger cover. We bury the real pages." "Crow is not a fool," Taza said. "He will check. He will see numbers. He will see dates. He will see his own name." Millie argued. "He is arrogant. He thinks he has won. He will not stop to check the watermarks on the paper in the middle of a canyon with a gun in his hand." Taza looked at the ledger, then at Millie. "It is a risk. If he realizes, if we do nothing, she dies," Millie said. "If we give him the real book, your people will die. This is the only way." Taza was silent for a long moment. He looked at the sun climbing the sky. They had 3 hours until noon. "Do it," he said. "For the next hour." Millie wrote until her fingers cramped. She sat in the dust, the ledger propped on her knees, transcribing the columns of stolen beef and whiskey into her own notebook paper, trying to mimic the slant of Ezekiel's hand. It did not have to be perfect. It just had to pass a glance. Taza tore the cover off the real ledger and carefully stitched Millie's pages inside using the awl from his repair kit. When it was done, they took the real pages, the true evidence of Silas Crow's crimes, and walked to a lone cottonwood tree that stood like a sentinel near the canyon entrance. It had been struck by lightning years ago. Its trunk split down the middle, blackened and twisted. "The lightning tree," Taza said. "My people say that what the sky strikes, the earth remembers." He dug a hole at the base of the blackened roots, deep into the dry soil. He placed the pages inside a tin box that had held his percussion caps, and buried it. He smoothed the dirt over and scattered rocks to hide the disturbance. "If we die," Taza said, looking at Millie, "this tree keeps the truth." "We will not die," Millie said, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. They rode toward Box Canyon. It was a narrow trap of red rock, a cul-de-sac with steep walls and only one way in. As they entered the mouth of the canyon, the sun was directly overhead, erasing all shadows. The heat was a physical blow. At the far end, waiting in the shade of the canyon wall, sat Silas Crow on a massive bay horse. Flanking him were Deputy Rourke and 3 other men, their rifles resting across their saddles. And in front of Rourke's horse, standing on the ground with her hands tied behind her back, was Jolie. She looked tiny against the towering red cliffs. Millie felt a wave of nausea, But she forced herself to sit straight in the saddle. She touched the bandage on her shoulder, a reminder of the pain she had already survived. She looked at Taza. He was stone. He was the Apache warrior the dime novels wrote about, impassive, dangerous, coiled to strike. But she knew where his heart was. She had felt it beat against her palm. "Ready?" Taza asked, his voice low. "Ready?" Millie lied. They urged their horses forward, walking into the trap with their heads high. Millie gripped the fake ledger in her hand. It felt light, too light to trade for a life. But it was all they had. Crow watched them come, a smile spreading across his face. "Punctual," Crow called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. "I like that in a savage way. Shows you can be taught." Taza did not speak. He stopped his horse 20 yards away. Millie pulled up beside him. "The girl," Taza said. "The book," Crow countered. Millie lifted the ledger high in the air so they could see it. "I have it," she shouted. Her voice was strong, carrying the authority of a woman who had faced down a classroom of unruly boys in a desert storm. "Ezekiel's book, every number, every theft." Rourke spat on the ground. "Give it here, teacher." "Let the girl walk to us first," Millie said. Crow chuckled. He nodded to Rourke. Rourke cut the rope binding Jolie's ankles, but kept the rope around her wrists. He gave her a shove. Jolie stumbled forward, walking slowly across the burning sand between the two groups. Her eyes were locked on Taza. "Now toss it," Crow commanded, raising a heavy revolver. Millie looked at the girl, then at the book. She took a breath. The air tasted of dust and danger. She was Amelia Hart, daughter of a minister, spinster schoolteacher, and she was about to look the devil in the eye and lie to his face. She prepared to throw the book. The sun hung directly overhead, a white hole in the sky that bleached the color from the Red Canyon walls. The silence in Box Canyon was heavy, broken only by the snorting of Silas Crow's bay horse and the dry rasp of cicadas. Millie sat rigid in her saddle, the leather rein slick with sweat in her grip, across the burning stretch of sand. Silas Crow smiled. It was a smile of ownership, the expression of a man who believed the world was a ledger, and he was the only one holding the pen. "The book," Crow repeated, extending a gloved hand. "The girl first," Millie said, her voice echoing off the stone. "Let her cross to us. When she is behind my horse, I will throw the book." Crow chuckled, a low, dry sound. He nodded to Deputy Rourke. Rourke shoved Jolie forward. The child stumbled, her knees hitting the hot sand, but she scrambled up instantly, her dark eyes wide and fixed on Taza. She began to walk, small and trembling, traversing the 50 yards of death that separated the two groups. Millie watched every step. 10 yards, 20. Taza was a statue beside her. He did not look at Jolie. He was watching the ridge line, watching the hands of the men behind Crow. Millie knew he was calculating angles, wind speed, and the tragic mathematics of a gunfight where the odds were 5-1. Jolie reached Taza's horse. Taza reached down, his arm a blur of motion, and swung the girl up behind him. "Now," Crow barked, his pleasant veneer vanishing. "The ledger, or I turn the three of you into a lesson for the vultures." Millie lifted the heavy book, the decoy she had spent the morning forging. She had bound it in the leather cover Taza had torn from the original. To the eye, it was Ezekiel's life work. To my knowledge, it was a trap. She threw it. The book arced through the shimmering air and landed with a heavy thud 10 feet in front of Crow's horse. "Fetch it, Rourke," Crow commanded. The deputy dismounted, keeping his rifle trained on Taza. He walked over, scooped up the book, and handed it to Crow. Crow weighed it in his hand. He ran his thumb over the leather. He looked at Millie, his eyes narrowing. "You are a sensible woman, Miss Hart," Crow said. "I truly regret that you had to see this." He opened the book. He flipped through the pages, seeing the rows of numbers, the dates, the damnation written in Millie's careful hand, mimicking Ezekiel's script. He nodded, satisfied. Then he closed the book and looked at his men. Kill the buck, Crow said casually, as if ordering a drink. Keep the woman alive for now. She has spirit. Liar, Millie screamed, the word tearing from her throat. Taza did not wait for the order to be executed. He did not reach for his rifle. There was no time. Instead, he jammed 2 fingers into his mouth and blew not a whistle, but a piercing, oscillating shriek that mimicked the cry of a wounded hawk, amplified by the acoustics of the canyon. Simultaneously, he dug his heels into the paint horse's flanks. The sound shattered the tense air. Crow's bay horse, high-strung and nervous, reared violently, twisting to the left. The other horses, spooked by the sudden noise and the movement, bucked. Rourke fired, but his aim was thrown off by his own horse dancing sideways. The bullet bit into the sand inches from Millie's stirrup. Ride! Taza roared, wheeling his horse around, shielding Millie and Jolie with his own body. They dove toward the cover of a pile of fallen boulders near the canyon wall. It was not an escape. They could not outrun rifles in the open. It was a desperate lunge for cover. A volley of gunfire erupted behind them. The air buzzed with angry lead. Millie heard the sickening thwack of a bullet hitting flesh, but her horse was still moving. Off, get off! Taza shouted as they reached the rocks. He practically threw Jolie into a crevice between 2 massive slabs of sandstone. Millie slid from her saddle, her knees hitting the gravel. Taza slapped the rumps of their horses, sending them stampeding back toward the canyon entrance, kicking up a cloud of dust to confuse the shooters. Then Taza collapsed. He did not fall gracefully. He crumpled, sliding down the face of the rock, a dark stain spreading rapidly across his thigh. Taza! Millie scrambled to him, dragging him deeper into the shelter of the rocks. Leg! Taza grunted through gritted teeth. Through and through, missed the artery. He was lying. The blood was bright red and pulsing. Millie ripped the hem of her petticoat, what was left of it, and tied a tourniquet above the wound. Pulling it tight with all her strength, Taza hissed, his head falling back against the stone, sweat instantly beading on his forehead. Outside their small fortress of stone, the shooting stopped. You are trapped, schoolteacher, Crow's voice boomed, calm and terrifying. You have nowhere to go. Give up, and I promise it will be quick. Millie looked at Taza. His face was gray beneath the desert tan. He checked his rifle, 3 rounds left. He checked his pistol, fully loaded. He is not going to let us live, Taza whispered. He has the book. He has won. He has nothing, Millie said, her voice shaking but her eyes hard. Wait. Wait for what? For the heat. Out in the open, Silas Crow sat on his calmed horse, the ledger resting on his saddle horn. He pulled a silver case from his vest, took out a lucifer match, and struck it against his boot. Burn it, Rourke said, nursing a bruised arm where his horse had thrown him. Burn it all. I intend to, Crow said. He brought the flame close to the open pages of the ledger, intending to set fire to the evidence right there in the canyon. A final act of erasure. But as the flame licked close to the paper, and the intense noonday sun beat down on the open pages, something happened. Martha Pike had given Millie a small vial of lemon juice and milk, a child's trick for secret messages, but effective. Millie had written across the title page in the mixture, invisible until heated. As Crow held the flame close, brown letters began to scorch onto the paper, ghostwriting appearing from nowhere. Murderer! Crow pulled his hand back. Startled, he looked closer. The heat of the sun and the match was bringing out more words on the margins. Ezekiel Finch killed by Crow. Crow stared at the book. He flipped the pages frantically. He saw the texture of the paper. It was too new, too crisp. He saw the faint watermark of the stationery company in St. Louis, not the Tucson ledger paper Ezekiel used. He roared, a sound of pure animal rage. He threw the book into the dirt. It is a fake, Crow screamed. They played us. The book is a fake. In the rocks, Millie gripped Taza's hand. He knows. Good, Taza breathed, fighting to stay conscious. Now he is angry. Angry men make mistakes. Find them, Crow yelled. Flush them out. The real book is here somewhere, Rourke. Take the left flank, Jenkins. Take the right, I want them dragged out by their hair. Bullets began to chip away at the sandstone protecting them. The rocks sprayed shards of stone into their faces. We cannot stay here, Taza said. They will flank us in 2 minutes. You cannot walk, Millie said, looking at his leg. I can fight, Taza said. He pushed himself up, his face contorted in agony. You and Jolie, you have to run. The lightning tree, you have to get to the tree. I am not leaving you, Millie said. This is not a debate. Amelia, Taza snapped. If I die, I die. If the book dies, my people are erased. Go! Millie looked at him. She saw the blood on his trousers, the sweat in his eyes, and the ferocious love for his land that burned brighter than the sun. No, Millie said. She grabbed his collar, pulling his face down to hers. We go together, or we end it here. She turned to the opening. Crow! She screamed. The firing stopped. The sudden silence was shocking. Crow! Millie yelled again. Standing up, bullets whizzed past her, but she did not flinch. You want the book? You want the truth? Stand down. Crow ordered his men. Let her speak. Millie stood exposed. A woman in a ruined blue dress, covered in dust and blood, looking like a fury of the plains. You killed Ezekiel Finch, she shouted, her voice carrying to the men hiding in the rocks, to the sky, to God. You stole the beef meant for starving children. You armed the renegades to kill your own neighbors so you could steal the water rights. Shut her up, Rourke yelled. No. Crow rode closer, his face twisted. Let her scream. Who is going to believe a hysterical woman who sleeps with savages? The ledger believes, Millie shouted. And it is buried where you will never find it unless I take you there. Crow stopped. He looked at her, weighing the risk. Show me, Crow said. Come out, show me, and I will let the girl go. You are a liar. Silas Crow, Millie said. But you are a greedy liar. You need that book gone. She ducked back down. Taza, can you move? If you help me, he whispered. Jolie, Millie said to the girl. Do you see that narrow gap behind the big rock, the one too small for a man? Jolie nodded, terrified. Crawl through it. It leads to the wash behind us. Run to the lightning tree. Do not stop. No, Jolie whispered. I will stay. You run, Taza commanded softly. You are the scout now. Little one, go. Jolie hesitated, then squeezed Taza's hand and vanished into the crack in the rock. Now us, Millie said. She pulled Taza's arm over her shoulder. He was heavy, dead weight on his left side. She groaned under the strain, her own injured shoulder screaming in protest. They moved, not running, but stumbling from cover to cover, retreating back toward the entrance of the canyon, away from the dead end. Rourke saw them. There, they are moving back. He charged, scrambling over the rocks. He was fast, driven by hate. He vaulted a boulder and landed right in front of them, his pistol raised. End of the line. Teacher! Rourke grinned. Taza tried to lift his rifle, but he was off balance. Rourke tightened his finger on the trigger. Suddenly, a small blur launched itself from the shadows. Jolie had not run. She had circled back. She slammed into Rourke's legs, sinking her teeth into his calf. Rourke howled, his shot going wild. Hitting the rock face, he kicked out, sending Jolie flying into the dust, but the distraction was enough. Taza swung his rifle barrel, smashing it into Rourke's knee. Rourke went down. Millie didn't think. She didn't remember Martha's lesson about hesitation. She swung her heavy boot and kicked Rourke in the temple. He slumped, unconscious. Go! Millie gasped. Hauling Taza up again, they stumbled out of the canyon mouth. The lightning tree stood 200 yards away, its blackened, split trunk rising like a warning finger. Crow was there. He had ridden around the flank. He was sitting on his horse right next to the tree, looking at the disturbed earth. Clever, Crow said, seeing the fresh dig marks. The lightning tree. What the sky strikes, the earth remembers. Isn't that the saying? He dismounted. He kicked the dirt aside, revealing the tin box. No, Millie screamed, dragging Taza forward. Crow picked up the box. He opened it and saw the real pages inside. He laughed, a sound of pure relief. "It ends," Crow said. He pulled a kerosene lantern from his saddle, smashed the glass against the tree trunk. Soaking the wood and the dry grass with oil, he struck a match. The fire whooshed up, hot and hungry. Crow tossed the open tin box toward the flames. "Get it!" Taza shouted, shoving Millie forward. He collapsed, his leg finally giving out. Raising his rifle to provide cover, Millie ran. She ran straight toward the fire. The heat seared her face. The pages were in the box, dangerously close to the oil-soaked grass. She dove. Her hands scrambled in the burning dirt. She grabbed the tin box just as the flames licked the edge of the paper. "Drop it!" Crow roared, aiming his pistol at her back. A shot rang out. Millie flinched, waiting for the impact, but it was Crow's hat that flew off his head. Crow spun around. On the ridge above the canyon, a line of silhouettes appeared against the sun. Blue uniforms, gold stripes. "Drop the weapon." Crow. Lieutenant Wyatt Carver's voice thundered down. Beside him were 6 Buffalo soldiers, their rifles leveled. "You have no jurisdiction here." "Carver!" Crow screamed, his composure finally shattering. "This is a local matter. It became a federal matter when you stole Army property," Carver shouted. "Fire a shot, Silas, and we will leave you here for the buzzards." Crow hesitated. He looked at the soldiers. He looked at Taza, who was lying in the dust, his rifle aimed at Crow's heart. He looked at Millie, clutching the tin box to her chest, surrounded by smoke. Crow's hand wavered. "Do not do it," Taza said softly. "Give me a reason." Crow looked at the hate in Taza's eyes and realized that the Apache would not miss. Slowly, with infinite reluctance, Silas Crow dropped his gun. But the fire he had started was not surrendering. The oil had caught the dry brush, and a sudden gust of wind whipped the flames up, creating a wall of heat between Millie and safety. She was trapped against the tree trunk, coughing, the smoke blinding her. "Millie!" Taza shouted. Disregarding his shattered leg, Taza crawled, then dragged himself up. He lunged through the wall of fire. He grabbed Millie by the waist and threw her clear of the burning brush, shielding her with his broad back as a branch of the cottonwood. Weakened by the fire, collapsed. The burning wood struck Taza across the shoulders. He grunted, a sound of agony, but he did not let go of her. He rolled them both away from the heat, extinguishing the sparks on his vest with the dust of the ground. "Taza!" Millie cried, scrambling over him. His shirt was scorched, the skin beneath angry and red, but he was breathing. "The book!" he rasped. Millie held up the tin box. Her hands were black with soot, her eyebrows singed, but the box was closed. "I have it," she wept. "I have it." Carver and his men rode down, surrounding Crow and Rourke, who was limping out of the canyon. The soldiers roughly pulled Crow's hands behind his back and slapped iron cuffs on his wrists. "Silas Crow," Carver said, his voice shaking with the magnitude of what he was doing, arresting the most powerful man in the territory. "You are under arrest for treason, theft, and murder. You are making a mistake, Lieutenant," Crow hissed, though his face was pale. "I will have your stripes for this." "Maybe," Carver said. He looked at Taza and Millie huddled on the ground. "But I will sleep tonight." The medic from the patrol ran to Taza, cutting away his trouser leg to tend to the bullet wound. Millie sat in the dirt, the tin box pressed to her chest like a shield. She looked at Taza. He was in pain, his leg bleeding, his back burned, but he was looking at her. "You walked into the fire," Taza whispered. "You pulled me out," Millie replied. She looked up at the sky. The sun was dipping lower, but the light was strange, filtered through the smoke of the burning tree and the dust of the battle. It was not a clear, bright victory. The soldiers looked at Taza with wariness, their hands near their guns. The town of Ironwood Junction was still full of people who believed the lies. Crow was in chains, but the world had not changed by magic. "It is not over," Millie said, watching them hoist Crow onto a horse. "No," Taza said. reaching out to take her soot-stained hand. "But we are still here. And we have the truth." Jolie crept out from behind the rocks and sat between them, placing one hand on Taza's knee and the other on Millie's arm. Millie looked at the three of them, a battered schoolteacher, a wounded Apache scout, and an orphan girl, united by blood and fire in the shadow of a burning tree. "Let's go home," Millie whispered, though she didn't know where that was yet. "Careful, Darlin," Taza murmured, echoing his earlier words, his thumb brushing the soot from her knuckles. "We have to survive in peace now." And as the soldiers led Crow away, the smoke drifted up into the vast, indifferent blue of the Arizona sky, a signal that the war had ended, but the struggle had just begun. The journey back to the Canyon de la Luna was not a triumphant march. It was a slow, agonizing procession of survival. Taza drifted in and out of consciousness, his body lashed to his horse like a bundle of trade goods. The burn across his back from the falling cottonwood branch had blistered angry and red, and the bullet wound in his thigh had begun to swell despite the tourniquet. When they finally crested the ridge and looked down into the stronghold of the Apache, Amelia Hart did not see a fortress of savages. She saw thin trails of smoke rising from cooking fires. She saw children chasing a ragged dog through the brush. She heard the low, rhythmic grinding of corn against stone. It was not a war camp. It was a neighborhood. They lowered Taza onto a pallet of furs inside a wickiup that smelled of dried sage and wood smoke. For the next 3 days, Millie did not see the sun. She existed in the twilight of the shelter, fighting a war against infection with nothing but water, cloth, and the fierce determination of a woman who refused to bury another man she cared for. She summoned every lesson Martha Pike had drilled into her during their brief encounter. Keep the wound clean. Let it bleed a little to wash out the poison. Keep him cool. But it was Jolie who saved him. The girl, silent as a shadow, brought bowls of a foul-smelling green paste made from pounded roots and leaves. Millie hesitated at first, her Western mind recoiling at the sight of the unidentifiable muck. "It pulls the fire out," Jolie whispered, pointing to the angry red streaks radiating from the bullet hole. "Grandmother says so." Millie looked at the child, then at Taza's gray face. She took the bowl. She applied the poultice, covering it with clean linen. Within hours, the heat in Taza's skin began to recede. During those long nights, Millie watched him. Stripped of his weapons, his shirt, and his stoicism, he looked younger. The scar on his face was just white tissue now, not a mark of intimidation. She bathed his chest with cool water, her hands learning the landscape of his ribs and the broad muscles of his shoulders. It was an intimacy far deeper than the awkward courting she had experienced in St. Louis parlors. There, intimacy was a gloved hand held for 2 seconds too long. Here, it was washing the sweat of a fever from a man's naked skin while praying to a God she was no longer sure was listening. When Taza finally opened his eyes on the 4th morning, clear and lucid, Millie was asleep sitting up, her head resting on her knees. He did not wake her. He simply watched her, his dark eyes taking in the soot that still stained her hem and the new lines of exhaustion etched around her mouth. She had arrived in the territory as a porcelain doll. She was being forged into iron. Outside the wickiup, life continued. As Taza regained his strength, Millie began to step out into the camp. She expected hostility. She expected to be treated as a prisoner or a pariah. Instead, she was ignored, which was a kindness she had not anticipated. The women went about their work, weaving baskets, tanning hides, roasting agave hearts in pit ovens. They watched her. Yes, but their eyes held curiosity rather than hatred. One afternoon, an old woman with skin like crushed walnut shells beckoned Millie over to a grinding stone. She did not speak English. She simply handed Millie a smooth river rock and pointed to the corn. Millie sat. She ground the corn. Her rhythm was clumsy at first, causing 2 young girls nearby to giggle behind their hands, but she kept at it until her shoulders burned and the rhythm smoothed out. The old woman nodded once, a universal seal of approval, and handed Millie a gourd of water. It was in these moments that the wall of prejudice Millie had been raised behind began to crumble. She saw a father braiding his daughter's hair, She saw young men racing horses, laughing with the same brash arrogance as the boys back in Missouri. She saw grief when an elder died, and joy when a hunt was successful. They were not the monsters of the penny dreadfuls. They were people clinging to the edge of a world that was trying to shake them off. But the world outside the canyon was not idle. Lieutenant Wyatt Carver rode into the camp a week later, accompanied by 2 buffalo soldiers who looked uneasy being this deep in Apache territory. Carver looked like a man who had been dragged through a cactus patch. His uniform was clean, but his eyes were haunted. He sat with Taza and Millie by the fire, accepting a cup of coffee that tasted of chicory and smoke. "The ledger is with Judge Holloway," Carver said, his voice heavy. "He is a good man, stern. He has issued a federal indictment against Silas Crow." "Then it is over," Millie said, feeling a weight lift from her chest. "It is not over, Miss Hart," Carver corrected gently. "It is just filed. Crow has lawyers, expensive ones from San Francisco. They are arguing that the ledger is a forgery, that you are a hysterical woman with a vendetta, and that I am a rogue officer with a sympathy for hostiles." "The invisible writing," Millie insisted. "The chemical reaction?" "The judge saw it. It is the only reason Crow is currently in a cell at Fort Grant and not drinking whiskey at the Golden Spur," Carver admitted. "But the town is a different matter." He hesitated, looking down at his boots. "Tell us," Taza said. He was sitting up, leaning against a saddle, his leg bound in fresh bandages. "Half the town believes Crow was framed," Carver said. "They say the Apache witched the book. And you, Miss Hart, the rumors are unkind." "Say it," Millie said, her voice steel. "They call you a traitor," Carver said softly. "They say you lured Ezekiel to his death to run off with a savage. They say no decent woman would live in a camp like this unless she had lost all her morals." Millie felt the sting of the words, sharp and poisonous. In St. Louis, a woman's reputation was her currency. Without it, she was bankrupt. She looked at her hands, rough and brown from the sun and the work. "Let them talk," Millie said. "They are not the ones who walked through the fire. There is more," Carver added, his expression darkening. "Deputy Rourke. We were transporting him to Tucson for trial. He escaped." Taza went still. "How?" "He killed a guard, slipped his irons. We have patrols out, but he has vanished into the Badlands. He has nothing left to lose, Taza, and he blames you 2 for everything." When Carver left, a heavy silence settled over the camp. The sun was setting, painting the canyon walls in hues of violent orange and bruised purple. Taza struggled to his feet, using a crude crutch made of ironwood. He limped away from the fire, toward the edge of the spring where the water bubbled up from the deep earth. Millie followed him. "You should go," Taza said without turning around. "Go where?" Millie asked. "Carver can take you to Tucson. The sisters at the mission will take you in. You can change your name, start over." "Is that what you want?" Taza turned. The pain in his leg was nothing compared to the pain in his eyes. "I want you to live. Amelia, Rourke is out there. The town hates you. If you stay here, you are painting a target on your back that will never wash off. You will be the white squaw for the rest of your life. They will never let you be clean again." Millie stepped closer. The distance between them was charged, electric with the things they had survived. "Clean," she repeated, tasting the word. "You think I care about being clean in their eyes? I spent my whole life being clean. Taza, I was the minister's daughter. I wore gloves to hide my hands and high collars to hide my neck. I smiled when I wanted to scream. I was pristine, and I was completely invisible." "So," she reached out and took his hand. His fingers were rough, scarred, lethal. "I am not a virgin to the world anymore," Millie said, her voice steady and low. "Not because of what they think I have done, but because I have finally chosen something for myself. I chose to get off that train. I chose to ride into the desert. I chose to burn my hands to save that box." She looked up at him, her blue eyes fierce. "You said you were afraid I would be crushed between your world and mine," she said. "Taza, I was already crushed. I was suffocating in that corset and that life. The difference is that now, for the first time, I am standing up, and I am standing where I want to be." Taza looked at her for a long time. The wind rustled the cottonwood leaves above them. He raised his hand slowly and cupped her cheek. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, a touch of infinite tenderness. "You are a stubborn woman," he whispered. "I have had a good teacher," she replied. He did not kiss her. It was not a moment for the romance of novels. He simply leaned his forehead against hers, breathing her in. It was a pact. It was a recognition that they were two broken pieces that fit together to make something whole. "I cannot promise you safety," Taza said. "Rourke is a wolf." "Then we will be wolves too," Millie said. A small sound behind them made them pull apart, though they did not let go of each other's hands. Jolie was standing there, holding a small woven basket of berries she had gathered. She looked at Taza, then at Millie. A shy smile spread across her face. She walked up to Millie and held out the basket. "For you," Jolie said in halting English, then pointing to the wickiup where Millie slept, and then to Millie herself. She said one word, "home." Millie felt tears prick her eyes, not tears of sadness, but of a profound, aching gratitude. The outline she had read, the story she was living, the child she had saved it all crystallized in that single syllable. "Yes," Millie whispered, crouching down to hug the girl. Home. The falling action of their lives was not a settling of dust. It was the settling of a foundation. In the days that followed, the legal machinery of the territory ground on. It was a broken wheel, clanking and groaning. News came that Crow's lawyers had managed to get his venue changed to a friendlier court in Prescott. Though the charges remained, the justice was imperfect, diluted by money and influence. Silas Crow might never hang, but his power was broken. The ledger had done its work. The water rights to Canyon de la Luna were tied up in federal injunctions that would take 20 years to unravel, effectively saving the land for the tribe for a generation. But the threat of Rourke hung over them like a thunderhead that refused to break. Every shadow seemed to hold the deputy's sneer. Every snap of a twig made Taza reach for the Colt revolver he now wore even while sleeping. Yet, amidst the tension, there was life. Millie began to teach. It started with Jolie. They would sit in the shade of the mesquite trees, scratching letters into the dirt with a stick. A is for apple, B is for bear. Soon, other children came, then a few mothers, curious about the marks that held words. Millie did not try to make them white. She did not teach them catechism or manners. She taught them to read the treaties that were used to cheat them. She taught them the arithmetic of trade so they would not be swindled by the agents. She was no longer Miss Hart of St. Louis. She was Nantan Ika, the chief's woman, or sometimes just teacher. One evening, 3 weeks after the fire, Millie and Taza stood again by the spring. The sun was gone, and the first stars were piercing the velvet sky. The air was cool, smelling of damp earth and blooming night jasmine. Taza was healing. He could walk now with only a slight limp, though the scars on his back would mark him forever. The scouts found tracks near the North Pass. Taza said quietly, "Shod horse, one rider, moving slow." "Rourke?" Millie asked. "He is circling, waiting for a mistake." "We will not give him one," Millie said. She turned to face him. The moonlight washed the color from the world, leaving only silver and shadow. Taza looked formidable, dangerous, and beautiful. Millie reached out. She did not hesitate this time. She placed her palm flat against his chest, over the pocket of his shirt, over the scar tissue, over the muscle and bone. She felt it. Thump, 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 thump. The rhythm was steady. It was the rhythm of the canyon, of the desert night, of the survival they had clawed from the fire. Taza looked down at her hand, then up into her eyes. He covered her hand with his own, pressing it tighter against his skin. "Careful, Darlin." He echoed the words he had spoken in the cave, but the tone was different now. It was not a warning of danger. It was a promise of endurance. "That is where you live now." "I know," Millie whispered. "It is the only address I have left." They stood there in the silence, listening to the water and the heartbeat. Two outcasts who had found the center of the world in each other. The war was not over. Rourke was out there, and the century was turning against the Apache, but for tonight, in the falling quiet of the canyon, they were undefeated. The wheels of justice in the Arizona Territory did not turn with the precision of a Swiss clock. They ground forward like a wagon with a broken axle, lurching and groaning, but moving nonetheless. News traveled slowly to the Canyon de la Luna. It arrived 6 weeks after the fire, carried by Lieutenant Wyatt Carver, who rode in not with a squadron, but with a single pack mule and a face that had lost some of its perpetual tension. He found Amelia Hart Millie kneeling in the dirt by the stream, washing bandages. Taza was beside her, sharpening a skinning knife on a whetstone. The domesticity of the scene was deceptive. Both of them had rifles within arm's reach. "The verdict came down yesterday in Prescott," Carver said, swinging down from his saddle. He dusted his hat against his leg. Silas Crow was found guilty on 12 counts: corruption, embezzlement of federal property, and conspiracy to commit murder. Millie stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. "And the murder of Ezekiel Finch. The jury deadlocked on that one," Carver admitted, his voice tinged with the frustration of an honest man in a dishonest land. Without a body, and with Rourke missing, the defense argued it was hearsay, but the fraud charges were undeniable. The ledger was ironclad. The invisible ink was the nail in the coffin. Crow was sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison at Yuma. 20 years, Taza said. He tested the edge of his knife. "A man like Crow will not survive 5 in the hellhole. He has lost his land claims." Carver continued. "The federal government has placed an injunction on the water rights until a formal survey can be completed. That survey will take years, maybe decades. For now, the canyon is yours." It was not a total victory. Ezekiel Finch remained unavenged by the strict letter of the law, and the town of Ironwood Junction still whispered that the Apache had bewitched the judge. But the truth had been written into the public record. The monster had been caged. "Thank you, Wyatt," Millie said. "Do not thank me yet," Carver said, his eyes scanning the rim of the canyon. "Rourke is still out there. A man with a bounty on his head and hate in his heart does not just ride into the sunset." Carver was right. The peace of the canyon was fragile, a thin sheet of glass over a turbulent sea. 3 nights later, the moon was hidden behind a thick bank of monsoon clouds. The canyon was plunged into a darkness so absolute it felt physical. Millie was in the small wickiup she had come to call home, grading the slate work of the 3 children she had begun teaching that week. Taza was outside, tending the small fire. Suddenly, the flap of the wickiup lifted. Jolie slipped inside. She did not make a sound. She crawled to Millie and tugged on her skirt. "Teacher," the girl whispered. "The horses, they are not sleeping." Millie froze. She knew better than to dismiss the instincts of a child who had survived alone in the desert. "What do you hear?" "Metal," Jolie said. "Metal on stone. Slow. Like a snake with iron scales." Millie blew out the lantern instantly. She moved to the flap and whistled a low, melodic trill that sounded like a nightjar. It was the signal she and Taza had agreed upon. Outside, the silhouette of Taza melted into the shadows. He had heard it too. The attack did not come with a scream, but with the snap of a twig. A shadow detached itself from the brush near the horse line. It raised a rifle. "Taza!" Rourke's voice was a jagged rasp, slurry with drink and madness. "Come out! You red devil, I know you are there!" Rourke fired blindly into the camp. The bullet tore through the canvas of a nearby shelter, sending a spray of dirt into the air. Millie did not hide. She had stopped hiding the day she walked into the fire. She moved to the left, flanking the position where Rourke stood, her hand gripping the heavy Colt revolver Taza had taught her to use. Taza moved to the right. "You are alone, Rourke." Taza's voice floated out of the dark, impossible to pinpoint. "Crow is gone. The money is gone. Go home." "This is my home," Rourke screamed, spinning around, trying to find a target. "White man's land. You stole it. You stole the woman. You stole my life." He saw movement, a flash of Taza's shirt. Rourke leveled his rifle and fired. But Taza was not there. He had tossed his vest onto a bush to draw the fire. While Rourke worked the lever of his Winchester, Millie stepped out from behind the mesquite tree, 10 yards away. "Drop it, deputy," she commanded. Her voice did not tremble. Rourke spun toward her, the rifle swinging up. "You," he snarled. "The whore schoolteacher." He aimed at her chest. Before he could pull the trigger, an arrow hissed through the air. It struck Rourke not in the heart, but through the meat of his right shoulder. Rourke screamed. Dropping the rifle, he reached for his pistol with his left hand. Taza materialized from the darkness. He did not use a knife. He used the stock of his own rifle, swinging it in a brutal, efficient arc that connected with Rourke's jaw. Rourke collapsed into the dust, unconscious before he hit the ground. Millie rushed forward, kicking the pistol away from Rourke's hand. She stood over him, her chest heaving, the gun pointed at his head. Taza stood beside her. He looked at the fallen man, then at Millie. In the old days, in the wars of his youth, he would have finished this. It would have been justice. "Do we kill him?" Taza asked. It was not a challenge. It was a genuine question. He was leaving the choice to her. Millie looked at Rourke. She saw a broken, hateful man who would rot in his own bitterness. She thought of the children sleeping in the wickiups nearby. She thought of the school she wanted to build. "No," Millie said, lowering the hammer of the gun. "We are not him. We do not kill for satisfaction. We kill only to survive. And he is done." They bound Rourke's hands and feet with rawhide. The next morning they threw him across his horse and rode him to the edge of the territory, where they handed him over to a surprised patrol of cavalrymen. "Tell the judge he fell," Taza told the sergeant, pointing to Rourke's shattered jaw, with Rourke in irons and Crow in prison. The shadow finally lifted from the Canyon de la Luna. The seasons turned. The scorching heat of summer gave way to the golden light of autumn. The cottonwood trees along the creek turned a brilliant yellow, dropping leaves like gold coins onto the water. Millie did not return to the east. She wrote a letter to her father in Missouri, explaining that she had found her congregation, though it looked nothing like the one he preached to. She built her schoolhouse. It was not a grand building. It was a structure of adobe brick and timber, built by Taza and the men of the tribe, nestled against the red rock wall near the entrance of the canyon. It had a roof of thatch and a floor of hard-packed earth, but inside, there were books. Millie ordered them from Tucson readers, geographies, histories. She opened the doors not just to the Apache children, but to the children of the poor prospectors and homesteaders who clung to the edges of the desert. At first, the white parents were suspicious. But when the fever swept through the settlement in November, and Millie rode out with her medicines willow bark for pain, globe mallow for coughs, secrets she had learned from the women of the tribe, the barriers began to fall. A miner named Swanson brought his 2 sons to the school a week later. "They need to learn to read, ma'am," he mumbled, hat in hand, avoiding Taza's gaze. "And thank you for the medicine." Millie became the bridge. She was the woman who stood between 2 worlds, refusing to let them collide in violence. She taught the Apache children English so they could read the treaties and defend themselves in the white man's courts. She taught the white children that the people of the canyon were not monsters, but families who loved the land. And Taza was the guardian of that bridge. He did not abandon his people to become a white man. He wore his moccasins and kept his hair long. He remained the Nantan, the leader who organized the hunts and settled disputes. But he also learned to navigate the new world. He rode into towns to negotiate prices for the tribe's baskets and horses, ensuring they were not cheated. He stood beside Millie when the Indian agents came with their clipboards and their arrogance. His silent presence a reminder that this land was held not just by law, but by strength. He chose the path of honor. It was a harder road than war, requiring more patience and more swallowing of pride. But it kept his people alive. It kept them home. Winter came, bringing crisp nights and days of crystal blue. On the night of the solstice, a fire was lit in the center of the camp. It was a large fire, the flames leaping up toward the stars. The elders gathered, wrapped in blankets. The drum beat a steady rhythm, the heartbeat of the earth. Taza and Millie stood before the fire. There was no preacher. There was no Bible. There were no rings of gold. Millie wore a dress of soft deerskin, bleached white and beaded by the women of the clan. Taza wore a clean linen shirt and his best buckskins. They did not need a ceremony to be married. The desert had married them the night they survived the storm. But they needed to speak the words. Taza took Millie's hands. His face, illuminated by the firelight, was open and unguarded. "I choose you," Taza said in English, so she would understand. And then in Apache, so the ancestors would hear, "I choose you for the hunt and for the rest. I choose you for the fight and for the peace. You are the fire in my winter." Millie looked at him. She saw the scar that ran down his face, the history written on his skin. She saw the man who had pulled her from the alley and walked through the flames for her. "I choose you," Millie said, her voice clear and strong. "I choose this life. I chose this home. I choose you forever. Nantan." It was simple. It was durable. It was a vow made of iron and earth. Jolie, standing in the front row with a crown of dried sage in her hair, beamed. She ran forward as the drum beat faster, disregarding all ceremony, and wrapped her arms around both of their waists. The tribe laughed a sound of genuine joy that rose up and filled the canyon. Spring returned to the Arizona territory. The cactus flowers burst into bloom, painting the desert in shocking pinks and yellows. One evening, as the sun began its descent, painting the canyon walls in the deep, burning reds of the blood that had been shed to keep them, Millie and Taza walked to the edge of the water. The school day was over. The clinic was closed. The work was done. They stood side by side, watching the light change on the water. The reflection of the cliffs made the pool look like it was filled with liquid copper. Taza looked at Millie. She was no longer the pale, frightened girl at the train station. Her skin was browned by the sun. Her hands were strong, and her eyes held the quiet confidence of a woman who knew exactly who she was. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The silence between them was comfortable, a shared space that they had built brick by brick. Millie turned to him. She reached out and placed her hand flat against his chest, feeling the steady, reassuring thrum of his heart. Thump, 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 thump. It was the sound of her life. Taza smiled, a small, private smile that barely touched his lips but lit up his eyes. He covered her hand with his own. "Careful, Darlin," he whispered, the old joke now a cherished prayer. "That is where you live now." "I know," Millie said softly. "I'm home." Jolie came running down the path from the village. She did not stop until she reached them, breathless and laughing. She pushed herself between them, grabbing Millie's free hand and Taza's free hand, linking them together in a chain. "Look," Jolie said, pointing to the sky. "The first star." They looked up, high above the canyon rim. In the deepening indigo, a single, bright star burned. It was a hard land. The West was still wild, full of danger and prejudice. The years ahead would bring drought, sickness, and new threats from a government that wanted to erase the Apache. But in that small corner of the world, next to the spring that gave life to the desert, a house stood. It was not built of wood or stone, but of choice. It was built of courage, and it was held together by the shared rhythm of three hearts beating as one. They had survived the hunt. They had survived the fire. And now, under the vast, watching sky, they would survive the peace. Thank you so much for listening to this story of Amelia and Taza. It has been a journey through the dust and fire of the Old West, and I hope their story touched your heart as much as it did mine writing it. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. I am always amazed to see how far these stories travel. Are you listening from a busy city, a quiet countryside, or somewhere in between? Let's share our thoughts and connect. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales. Hit that like button to support the work. If you really want to help this story reach more people, please press the hype button. Your support means the world to me and helps keep the spirit of the West alive. Thank you, and happy trails until we meet again.